Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 4th season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Real Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about minute 19, which begins with Thor and friends standing on a cliff looking out over Jotunheim and ends with a bright light appearing in the sky in front of them. To our guests, happy Thor's Day. Returning once again, we have Krissy, Lenz, and Nathan Blackwell from the Most Excellent 80s Movie Podcast. And in honor of today being Thor's Day, Thursday as the mortals call it, what is your favorite Thor moment from any movie, any source? Could be Babysitter's Club, whatever it is. When you think Thor, what's the first moment that comes to mind?
For me, it's probably Thor Ragnarok, when he is talking to Valkyrie across the cage, when he's trying to compliment her and he's doing a bad job of it. And that just kind of, that to me is a seminal moment in terms of just the comedy shift that the whole Thor storyline has kind of taken. And I'm definitely all about that.
Agree, except for so totally still Ragnarok, but it's that moment where he's dangling on the chain and he drifts away and then he's like, wait till I come back around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not even doing anything.
No.
Yeah, that's one of those few moments where it was somewhat spoiled in the trailers, but it was still so much better even in the execution. I loved it. You talked yesterday about Thor kind of being kind of arrogant at first, and that to me is what really kind of started off Thor Ragnarok. Like, this is going to be a different Thor. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about it. So we're going to get right into this minute in just a minute.
We just love the artwork that we have for the show this season with the Bifrost that Matthew and I are traveling through. This show art is now available in our merch store. If you go to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute and you click on merch, you can find t-shirts, you can find mugs, pillows, all sorts of stuff that has our logo on it. Again, just head over to the online store, truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute, and click on merch.
So this is a really fun minute to talk about because there are literally only two lines of dialogue. Literally 6 words are spoken in this entire minute. And yet I feel like so much is said.
And so much is not said.
Yes.
Let's also make sure we point that out. We'll talk about the script in a little too.
Definitely, yeah. But yeah, so what did you all notice in this minute that's pretty much mostly, I shouldn't say silence because there's very stirring music, but definitely no dialogue.
The vibe I definitely got was that this is, again, it's like the young princes out on their first road trip. And it's like, I'm not gonna ask the bartender for alcohol. You do it. Like they're just they're confident in themselves, but not in the situation. They're just still a little green, and you can see that. Or in is it Hogun? Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, yep. Hogun the Grim.
Yeah, Hogun is like, we shouldn't be here, and then Loki is like, oh shoot, and you could see it in his eyes, like he feels a little over his head,
Yeah, that's one thing we're definitely going to talk about when we get to that in terms of what is he thinking in that moment. So the first question I, though, have is, where are they going? It looked, when they first look out, it just looked like bleakness in every direction.
Right. No one's looking at a map.
Right. No one's looking at a map. They don't have any sort of compass or anything that points them in the right direction.
In 500 feet, turn right.
Yeah. There's no Siri giving them directions. It's I don't know. I have so many questions about Heimdall and the way that he operates the Bifrost. Like, did he say, this is another way I'm going to stick it to Thor? I'm going to put them right on the edge of a cliff.
I'm going to put them on the other
side of the planet. Like, how does that work? How specific can he get when he's operating the Bifrost? Like, could he have in fact deposited them right there in the central plaza in the middle of the city? Or is that kind of off limits because you're not supposed to do that in town limits? Like, I don't know. It's so confusing to me.
I mean, we know that when the Bifrost goes to Midgard, it can go to either Scandinavia or New Mexico. So clearly it's not just like pointing, it's not just like Bifrost Station on every planet.
Yeah,
so,
right. The blue line.
Yeah. So they start walking, and one of the first things I noticed is, first of all, they're on that cliff, and there's just this huge, vast, I guess it's a valley, but it just looks empty. And then there's kind of it's ice formations, but it looks to me kind of like stalactites and stalagmites. And the whole thing, it makes me think of a cave.
Yeah.
This doesn't look like a verdant planet by any means.
Yeah, it looks like Khazak Doom from Lord of the Rings, in the winter.
Well, and it's interesting because, and I guess this is what they were going for. And it's hard to tell because it is so dark. Like this section of the film we're going to be watching, I mean, it's dark, it's blues and grays, and a lot of it is really hard to identify. But my guess is what the idea with these big, what look like stalactites or stalagmites really kind of coming up out of the ground is that they're actual former structures, former buildings. Like if you look at the one across the way from this cliff that they're standing on, there's actually an arch carved into it. So it was part of a building. And so we've landed amidst the ruins is basically what we're meant to get. It's just so hard to tell. And I think if it wasn't for kind of exploring the film this way, I don't think I ever would have realized that they're kind of on the edge of what you would in the comics call Jotun City. The Jotuns are the people from Jotunheim, which is interesting because in the mythology, all giants came from Jotunheim, not just frost giants. The Marvel really kind of made it. It's just very frost giants only. No earth giants, no sea giants. It's just frost giants here. But they're walking toward a Jotun city, is what I guess, or from the fringes of it into the downtown area.
Yeah, and I love that as they're walking, you can literally see kind of the ice, the ruins crumbling around them. And Kenneth Branagh said in the commentary track, he wanted the world to look kind of sad and angry and desolate. He wanted this to look like a people who had been so thoroughly defeated and now they were both like very broken, but also still had all of that anger and resentment and just kind of like built up. Almost like it looks both sad, but also looks like, these are people who are not, they feel defeated, but they're not going to want to be trifled with any further.
Yeah, absolutely. And as they do walk, I mean, you will see, and perhaps it's only because the buildings have fallen down. Like, I'm not actually sure, but 25-ish seconds in, you see a shot, and through, like in the distance, you actually see the twin towers back there that are Lofi's, his main hall. I think it's called Utgard Hall in the comics. I don't think it's ever identified here, but in the town of Utgard, which is, I guess, where we are. But so I guess to that end, to answer your question, that's, I guess, how they know where they're going is they're walking toward the towers off in the distance.
Yeah, you can see them like around 50 seconds. You can see them crossing a bridge. And then you can kind of see just a bit of a structure, the general outline of a city path,
Yeah. And we had seen, like, when very early in the film, when we were in Odin's flashback, you could see that there were roads and buildings and all sorts of stuff here. So, yeah, this really is just kind of like the remnants of what once was possibly a great frost giant city here.
Right. Now, of course, in there we get the only dialogue in this minute with Hogun saying we shouldn't be here, and Thor just kind of ignoring that and just saying, let's move ahead. We should get going. What do you kind of take from that little exchange?
Just that Thor is letting his arrogance and his kind of his quest lead the way, while everyone else is kind of having second thoughts, like they're taking in the actual environment and situation that they see in front of them, and Thor is kind of letting that arrogance guide him.
Thor is the opposite of Loki, as we said, a couple of days ago, where Loki is always evaluating the situation, adapting to the situation, and changing the plan as he goes along. Thor can't do that. He can't do the mental pivot. So he's like, I decided this. This is what it's going to be. Right. And at no point will I change direction or change my mind or allow new information to make me rethink, because Thor put his foot down, and this is what we're going to do. And he's not as flexible or as, I think, aware even.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like what he said in Thor Ragnarok. I make grave mistakes all the time. Things seem to work out.
Yep.
That's just chick. But in this one, it's less. He's even less self-aware of that fact, and it's just like, I said we were doing this. We're doing it. Like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I wonder if in his mind, is he still coming here, as he said earlier, just to talk, just to ask them some questions? Or, I mean, I feel like he is acting so warlike at this point. Like, I feel like he's not necessarily thinking about that at this point. Like, he really seems to like dead set on a confrontation.
Yeah, no, he's riding his wave of STP. He's got that something to prove train, and he's just, gonna ride it all the way to town.
Yeah, he was raised on these stories of glory and battle and victory through war, and he sees himself as the heir and continuation of that kind of legendary stories.
Yeah.
And you don't choose a cape with shoulders that wide if you don't plan to really carry through on all your promises.
Yeah. I mean, he's quite literally the hammer that's looking for a nail, where just he's not thinking in any other terms. And I also get the sense of, I follow sports a lot, and to me, this is like the athlete who was just at the high school level was just crushing everyone and is just so used to winning without even thinking about it. And now all of a sudden they're in college and everyone is as good as they are and they're just having trouble adjusting. That's kind of like Thor is the one who always wins on the practice battlefield. They've had some other battles that have all been pretty easy. And he's kind of like what you're saying, Krissy, like he's just like, nope, I know my mission. I'm not going to think about it. But in the back of his head, I think you're starting to see the doubts already. And so why is it Hogun that speaks up? Is it just because we haven't heard him speak much? Or I feel like he's kind of been presented as the most reasonable of the other three. And then Volstagg just loves him food and Fandral just loves himself.
Yeah, and throwing out other lines. And it would have come off of an interaction with all three of them in the script where Thor, or as soon as they land, Volstagg basically falls backward off this cliff. He loses his footing. Thor grabs him by the belt and says, "Come on, big fella, up," and then pulls him back up to the top. And Volstagg says, This belt is now my lucky belt. I will never remove it, even when bathing." And Fandral says, "You bathe?" And then Hogun comes in with being the more serious, "We shouldn't be here." And I feel like, again, this was a moment where just like Kenneth Branagh, he probably said, "Yeah, we don't need any of that. That's just not what I want to do with this movie here. Let's just start with the Hogun line and we'll come in with that." And so I think that's why we have Hogun saying that line, which works much more appropriately for the kind of the somberness that we have in this moment. Like all of that silliness would have just felt so out of place.
There's so much conveyed in terms of like the fear and the slow building. I think, if you had that slapstick, it would be totally out of place.
And then it would have continued too, because even after Hogun says we shouldn't be here and Thor says too late now, Fandral says, "Actually, it's not. We could turn right around, hop back to Asgard, share a mug by the fire. Could be nice." And then Thor and Loki kind of continue.
Kill these guys.
It's like, they just keep going. Like it doesn't end. Thor and Loki are like, we can gauge, we can survey and all this stuff. And Volstagg is like, I like that. And then Sif finally is just like, he's just got to swing his hammer, which, I mean, really, I think all is conveyed by Thor just saying, let's move and ignoring everything else.
Yeah. No, and I think there's something there too, especially because I think you're right. All that slapstick would have been nonsense. But instead, we do get that one shot of Fandral. We actually get two of him, first just kind of looking around. But then after that exchange with Hogun, he's the one who kind of, it's sort of like he's in that place of, well, I think Thor's wrong, but what are we going to do? And I feel like, again, that said so much about the relationship all three of them have with Thor.
Yeah, I mean, as we've been talking about, since he somehow convinced them to come, right? Like his logic that he pitched to each of them as to why they should come. I mean, that speaks to like the way that he sells them. Like there's no logic in any of that, but somehow they're all here and they're like, should have thought better about that, but Thor's here, so I'll keep going.
He's the big, charismatic, like tall, attractive one among them, and it's like a group of college friends. It's like you've got the de facto leader who obviously sounds like he's in charge,
Mm-hmm. Very much so. One other thing I really like that jumped out at me in this minute is that as we're walking along, we start to get into this place where, we're starting to see the city. And there's this great shot of, first of all, them kind of like, we see them kind of looking through two of the big ice sculptures and kind of down into the valley. And for me, it gave me the feeling of like people are watching them. It felt very much like the position of someone up there that can't be seen who's watching them walk in. Did you get any of that same sense?
Yeah, for sure. And I even spent my time not watching the characters, but seeing if I could see someone in the shadows, if there were people spying down on them.
It's an interesting journey, and I think that's actually a valid point that I think certainly speaks to the way that Brana chose to shoot it, because it does feel like it feels very isolating, like it's just these little tiny six figures like deep in the far distance that we're seeing in these incredibly wide shots that are designed in a way which does make you feel like they're being watched.
And we do also get that one shot where we commented before about how it's all this world of grays and ice and blue and black and white. And then the redness of Thor's cape. Like, this is a man who the concept of camouflage has no meaning whatsoever.
Nope. He's got to just...
It's a smaller red cape.
Mm-hmm.
That's his disguise.
Definitely.
I feel like the colorists, like, they really pop those reds, because that cape always just really shines through.
Definitely. And so, of course, then it ends with just this little kind of like a bright light appearing in the sky in between the two ice sculptures that they're walking towards. And I don't think I would have even caught it if we hadn't like stopped there. And I think, Andy, am I right? This is the sun of that world?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here right at the end of the shot, coming from behind, and again, I'm just assuming that this is Utgard Hall that we're looking at there, which is, again, we're seeing that bridge where we last saw Odin defeating Lofi up on that bridge and taking the casket. So we end seeing the tower in the distance with the arch over it. And yeah, then I'm assuming that this is the sun of the Jotunheim sun that is shining down on them. And what I find so interesting about it is just how blue all of the sunlight and everything looks here. Because even with the sun shining full light of day, it is a cold, dark planet.
Yeah, I mean, when they first arrive, I thought this was nighttime.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of the Hollywood thing of nighttime is always very brightly lit compared to what it actually is. But it was really striking to me to realize, no, that's the sun. This is like daytime.
Yeah, which is cool. I think that's really cool to make a planet with the sun up that still is so cold and dark.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. All right, so as we start to wrap up, any other last things folks noticed?
I don't think so. What I appreciate most about the being able to kind of really walk through the minute this way and just kind of look at all the elements is I think this was probably the first time I actually was noticing like the city elements in all of these shots. Like it always felt just like, these columns, like as you said, kind of stalactite, stalagmite, very cave-like. I don't think I ever really pinpointed that much that, these are ruins. I mean, there are a few moments where you see what look clearly like actual columns from buildings. I'm like, okay, those are buildings. But you start realizing, these are all crumbled buildings. And it's actually interesting to kind of see that.
It would have been cool if they had instead of, there's like maybe a shot that they could have got rid of, like at 50 seconds where they're already past the bridge. And so we see a bridge. It would have been nice to then instead see them walk by actual like crumbled buildings, like a little closer, and you actually see a little more detail on a destroyed city.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that would have been cool. And that would have been a little more complicated, of that feeling like,
yeah,
there's this great power, this great evil that we're supposed to vanquish. Maybe they're not that great after all.
Yeah, right. I think that's a good point, especially because, and I think, Andy, you brought this up in our notes, when you really think about it, like earlier, Odin sort of made it seem like this, peace deal had been made between the two sides on kind of equal terms, even though the Asgardians had won. Now this looks like it's very clearly like these are the conquered people,
right.
and that the casket of eternal winter was a huge part of what was sustaining their world, and that's been taken away. This looks like a country that's been paying reparations for hundreds of years, and all their resources are just gone. And I think you have to stop and think about it, and think about those terms, because the more you do that, the more you realize, wait, I kind of might even feel a little sympathy for these folks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I had forgotten. But it's like, what kind of deal was that to make between Odin and Laufey, that where Odin gets to keep the casket, knowing that the casket is basically, as it's depicted in the film, that casket needs to be on this planet in order for Jotunheim to not be destroyed and slowly fall into pieces, which is what's happening. And the fact that Laufey has just been sitting here in his throne, not worrying too much about that, it's strange to me. Seems like a bad deal.
Marvel does a good job of that all around, though. Like, from, you could take that to Black Panther too, of like having you be so fully on one side of the story and then be like, oh no, there are shades of gray. Like, there's wrongness on both sides. There's no pure good, pure bad, and you can realize that the and it's so often the fathers, right? The fathers have made these mistakes in the past.
I think that's very true. What I find interesting and then perhaps frustrating with this film is the fact that Laufey is largely treated as just a mustache twirling villain. Like, he's not given a better sense of depth. And I think that's what makes it more frustrating for me, is I'd like to have gotten more from Laufey than that.
Yeah, I think part of it's because the thought was that would be too much for the movie, because Loki is really supposed to be the morally complex, we're not sure where he falls villain. And I think it would have been great and very brave for them to do that with two different characters. But in some way, I feel like we don't quite get that.
Yeah, they weren't quite ready to write a script that complicated. Yeah.
Definitely.
There was too much cape. They're like, we'll let the cape tell the story. Make the cape bigger.
All right, well, as always, to our two guests, thank you all so much. For people who want to catch up with more of what you're doing, tell them again where they can find you.
I've just recently wrapped our first live show at the Neighborhood Comedy Theater, and we are looking forward to doing more live recordings of the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast. Please download us and thumbs up us and like us and find us at Most Excellent Pod.
Great. And if they want to find you on social media, like Twitter or places like that, can they look for Most Excellent Pod?
Yep, exactly.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you to all of our listeners for being a great part of this, and have a great day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.